Okay, 11:03. So shall we get started, and then I'm sure people will keep joining as we go. So welcome to session 7 now of the cubesys discussion series for AVD. Today we're going to be concentrating on how we can analyze the cost of AVD once it's up and running. So the previous session we talked about how you could build a business case and estimate costs. This is about actually seeing the costs in Azure and how we can then allocate those to individual users. So we'll take you through that. Do you want to just pop to the next slide, Sylvan, and I'll remind everybody that we are, of course, recording this session so we can use it afterwards. So please be aware of that. Ask as many questions as you want. It is a discussion series, so please chip in and butt in, and we'll talk away as we go. And answer your questions, and of course we'll make sure you've got the content afterwards via email so you can watch videos, etc. Okay, move to the next slide. So Sylvan's going to run most of this session and talk you through what we've been building here at cubesys, and under our brand of Cloud Clarity, we have built a tool that will help you show the chargebacks and costs of running AVD in a lot more detail. But first of all, we'll sort of set the scene and explain some of the differences between CapEx and OpEx. I really get you to understand where those costs come from, or the underlying costs from inside Azure, etc. And then how we've built that tool to report back on it. And then we've got some roadmap things as well that's coming in the tool set, right, Sylvan?
Absolutely, yes.
Awesome. I think that's probably where I should hand over to you then, so we can dive straight into it. Right?
Yes.
Got our lovely selves. All right, so you got both the co-founders of cubesys today. As you can find us there on LinkedIn too.
Perfect. Thanks, Paul. So this first slide we had already in the slide deck from the last session. So session 6, if you've seen that. So basically, again, to recap, there is obviously on-prem that worked very differently, right? You see that red line, which is basically that's basically your peak usage that you can use, but you see the white line, and that should obviously never go across the red line, because then you're in trouble there. So on the right, that dashed line, you see that basically that limit goes away. So in cloud we can use whatever we want, and it's whatever we need, but it is also then priced at only what we use. So very different models, whereas on-prem we're responsible for having the right usage ready to be used and the right capacity ready to be used. And on cloud, that's obviously very different. We can use whatever we want, and we get charged for whatever we use.
And we know that causes some of our clients, particularly some of our government-based clients, some challenges, right, as they move from that CapEx on-prem sort of mentality and approach to more cloud-based, where you are paying for what you use. Because obviously with cloud, those costs can vary, right? It really does depend on how much you use. It can go up and down with that commitment. So doing budgeting and chargeback models, or providing a cost base can be a bit challenging, right? So how do we sort of get visibility of that is what we'll talk about today.
Yes, and let's jump into a bit more detail to compare the two models. So on the left we have that traditional VDI model that's usually on premises or in a data center. We talk about CapEx a lot and have transparent costs, right? So think about things like hardware, the data center cost, the licensing cost, all that kind of stuff. Physical cost is very transparent. So I order a server, gets shipped, I get an invoice for that. I know what it is, I know what I bought. I get billed up front. Usually when that server or that physical device arrives, or that license, I buy that license and I get just billed for that and I pay it. So it's a very defined cost, which we know and have done that forever. In the financial world, we would depreciate that over defined time. And there is obviously systems in place and processes in place how that known cost would be allocated based on a formula key throughout the business, right? So we would have that known cost, and we would split it out to the business in some sort of formula.
Yeah, I mean, I remember back in my infrastructure days that that also causes problems. So we'd have business units with a high headcount and maybe didn't use that service as much, and they'd be going, why am I paying that much? And it was all very arbitrary, sort of the number of users sort of divvied up the sort of total cost of running VDI, and so that would cause some angst sometimes with different business units. So there's pros and cons. So I think
definitely pros
all
and
the way
cons.
across.
I think that traditional way is a known quantity at least, right? So that's why people.
It's
easier
to understand, I think, sometimes. Yeah.
So on the right side, we have the cloud VDI. So which in our case is Microsoft Azure. Obviously very OpEx based. So the cost is based on usage. And as you learned in previous sessions, we can do a lot with managing the environment and making sure the right capacity is available. And with that beautiful automation, we only get charged for what we use, and we can scale that up and scale that down, which impacts the cost of the solution. The cost varies. That's why we say the cost varies based on consumption patterns. So if you have more people working on there for longer, that's obviously more expensive than if you have less people working less long or using the service less. So that line is the same as the cost line, right? So that stacks up.
But interesting, obviously, that can. Yeah, I just think so. You say the costs go up as we get more people on. Actually, the cost per head will usually go down as well as we use multi-session to do that. So it's interesting to see those patterns and those consumption bases.
Yeah, that's right. So whereas obviously you get usually more cost, it doesn't mean that the per head cost would probably go down because you can put more users on the same infrastructure. So a bit of economy of scale in play there as well. This next statement might be a bit controversial, but we do say cost is unpredictable, just because of the fact at the beginning of the month it's really hard to say what the bill will be at the end of the month down to the dollar. We usually don't know that, and it's influenced by a lot of things, such as obviously usage. And usually it's very hard for especially finance people to understand and allocate that variable cost. And usually, obviously, when that's costs going up or going up significantly, then it's a problem to allocate that and understand that. And it's hard for finance people to know what to do with it, right? That needs insights into the actual usage patterns to make sense out of those numbers and those costs. Just quickly pause here to see if do we have any questions. So far, so good. So we've spoken a lot about the problem statement now and what some issues could be, obviously, in your business dealing with that. The solution, as Paul said in the intro, we at cubesys built Cloud Clarity to exactly address those problems. The main aim for Cloud Clarity for AVD is to give you a consumption-based user cost report for any AVD environment. So we really want to basically that consumption cost, we want to break that down to the user. We want that to be a fair allocation and representation of what the user used. And from then on, we can having a good baseline and a good understanding of that base cost. We can do a reporting, show back, charge back, and all that kind of stuff. But I think it's very important to get that base understanding and have that real user cost on a consumption-based method. So basically, what is our cost in an AVD environment? And there can be many moving parts, right? So that could obviously be our session hosts, where people connect to and work on, but it could be storage, networking. You might use NetApp files for your profile storage. You might use personal VMs. You might use management VMs to manage your environment, or you might use things like Nerdio that help you to manage and scale the environment. So all these things are there. So what we do in Cloud Clarity to make up or define what your AVD environment entails is we can set a tag that can be on different subscriptions, but we set one tag to identify which components actually make up the AVD environment. So that could be as simple as saying application AVD, and the only thing I have to do is tag all the resources that make up my AVD environment with that tag. And that basically gives us the base cost for our AVD environment. So if you look at what data we have available to work with to create those reports and understand our environment. So obviously there's the Azure cost management. So that's probably the main bit where we say this component or costs this much, right? And that's obviously, if you look under the hood there, it's a bit more complex than that. So Microsoft have a quite complex and flexible billing model where different components get billed on different meters, which could be, for example, usually a virtual machine based on minutes while it's on, but that could be a lot of different factors that drive into how a component is actually charged. But Azure Cost Management, definitely one of the main data sources we pull in for that analysis. Then we have AVD session logs. So that's where everything gets recorded when a user basically logs on to the system. They do work and they log off. So we know which user was logged on to which session host for how long and all that kind of good stuff. So that's definitely very important as well to know those minutes consumed. And then we have the VM usage time. So basically we need to understand which virtual machines have been on for how long. And as we said before, so for a session host, that could be there could be obviously multiple users using the same virtual machine, but we still need to know maybe that if we scale out, maybe that VM came on for only a fraction of a day, for example. So we need to know when it was on and how much it was used from the session log. Now you can probably see a bit of a picture why we're using those data sources and what we're doing next. So let me move on to the AVD Cloud Clarity AVD dashboard. So this is the summary dashboard, and you can see straight away all the stats we're getting there. But I want to start explaining that screen at the top left where you have the reporting period. So we usually do in this screen, we do monthly based reporting. You can see a report type, which is listed pro rata and usage. So we have the ability to basically slice and dice the data in different ways. So I'll explain that on the next screen in a bit more detail. And then if you look at the different stats there, so we point out the reporting period, we point out the total cost. So that would be basically the total cost is all the Azure components that we have tagged with a particular tag that we're reporting on. That's the total cost, and you can absolutely go to Azure Cost Management, double check what you paid for the month for those components, and that's always going to be the same number. We then differentiate between AVD VM cost that can be allocated to user and they cannot be allocated to user. So we're transparent with that. So the main reason a AVD VM cost could not be allocated is if a VM session host VM, for example, is running idle without any sessions. So if you have a well-managed environment, that figure should be pretty close to zero.
We sometimes have clients though that like to have a VM ready for users to log on. So if they're a 24/7 operation, there is a chance that you might have nobody on for a few hours in the middle of the night or something, but you want that VM there ready just to go straight away and then scale up automatically as more users come aboard. But there is a possibility, a small one, but a possibility you could have unallocated costs there, right?
Absolutely, yes.
Sorry to interrupt. Is there an option then in Nerdio to actually scale down automatically if you've got unallocated VMs that are running
Absolutely,
for a
yeah,
period
and
of time?
yeah, absolutely, Dom. Yeah, and you, in fact, you do that today. I know you do that today, right? And there's different levels of aggression that you can use with Nerdio to do that. So we can be very forceful with that, or we can just wait for people to log off before we do it. We can even send them messages to say, please log off and log back on, so we can then move them from one VM to another, right? So there's lots of different options, and you are making use of that. Right?
Yeah. So you can keep that cost as close to zero as possible.
We would expect in nearly all the reports that unallocated cost would be pretty much zero, right? It'd be unusual to have much, if anything, in there, but we do want to make sure that the reporting tool captures that, so that it's a good indicator to go and look at your automation and make sure that it is optimized, right?
Yeah.
Now the next three tiles on here show the split of storage cost, network cost, and SaaS subscription. So usually in our case, that's Nerdio. And you see a tile there, AVD platform cost as well. So AVD platform cost is everything that's tagged that doesn't fall into any of the other categories. So that could be things like a management VM or a express route if you want to throw that in there, like things like that we don't necessarily need to pull out, but still make up your AVD environment, and that you definitely get charged for. Obviously, the stuff from Microsoft where they don't charge, that would not appear here. That's not interesting to us if we look at obviously cost reports. Then the second row of tiles, you see the total users that have logged on. You see an average cost per user. You see the total VM hours. So that's the total hours our VMs were available. We see total session hours. So that's the total number of sessions that we had. And again, like that's probably can be bigger than the total VM hours. But usually that should probably be somewhere close or maybe even more. So if you get the density of that, and if you get more users onto session hosts, then that session hours could even be bigger than the total VM hours, because it's definitely not a just one-to-one ratio.
Yeah, we want to see that in most cases. If they're using multi-session, we definitely want to see that session hours being higher than the VM hours, right? And that's because there's more users per VM. Right?
Exactly. Average number of sessions per user. So again, that's a monthly stat to see how many times the users had logged on in a given month. Average session time, so how long were the sessions, and total number of sessions. So just how many times they have connected and basically logged on, logged off, that sort of stuff. And then we have a bit of a 3-month trend at the bottom there to see some of the stats in comparison, so you know how you're tracking. Any questions? Any other questions on that?
This is where it starts getting interesting now, right, Sylvan? I think.
Yes. So let's explain that allocated and unallocated cost a bit better.
This is the bit where we probably need to pay attention, because it gets a little bit confusing, but it's hopefully we'll make sense of it, right? And you'll see why. Right?
Yes, the user allocated session cost. So as we said before, that is the cost that we can allocate to a user because a user has been logged on to a session host, for example, and it's broken down to the minutes a user consumed. And the cost does consider the SKU where the user was logged on to. So if a user logs on to or uses an application for that matter that runs on a VM that is on a more expensive SKU, then the per minute cost would be more expensive than if the user logged on to a VM that was cheaper. And usually that's driven by the use case or by the application. So think about those maybe engineering workloads or applications that need GPUs. They obviously run on more expensive VMs. So the per minute price would get more expensive. So we consider all that in our calculation. the unallocated session cost is the minutes where the VMs have run, which we can not allocate that to a user. Again, we calculate that on each VM individually, so we have those numbers. We know which VMs were not used and need to therefore go into that allocated session cost bucket. And then on top of that, as per previous screen, we have the shared costs as well. So the shared cost could be anything around the environment, such as these platform costs or the SaaS costs, as we explained. But it could also be other VMs, such as infrastructure VMs or VMs with no sessions at all, right? Those management VMs or domain controllers, if you want to add that costs onto your AVD environment. So that would all go into that shared cost bucket. So that obviously is not directly allocated to the user, but these costs are required, or these services are required to provide the AVD solution. So there's always going to be cost that has no direct link to a user, but that we need that to run the environment. Does that make sense? Any questions on that?
Just on the shared costs, sorry, I seem to be asking all the questions. If we wanted to apportion storage or network costs to users, is that just tagging that would have to be done?
So
Yeah.
We already assign storage and network costs that can be attributed to the user. We already attribute that to the user. So let's say the storage on a particular VM that acts as a session host, so that storage cost would already be allocated to the user.
Okay, so that's in the user allocated session cost then?
Correct, but there could be other storage or network costs that it's not.
Yeah. So if we wanted to offer a service, for example, to a customer base within our organization, and we tagged everything correctly and appropriately, we could assign, say, a session host or a host pool to that group of users, and then we could say the total cost for that group is X per month based on the reports that we receive.
I think I'm going to suggest, so when we move on to the next slide, and then
maybe that makes a bit more sense.
Yeah. Because Tom, where you're going, I think we've actually got 3 different ways of allocating these shared costs and unallocated sessions and stuff. So where it's very direct, when we can see the users logged on and we've got that VM that they're using to do their work and the storage that's associated with that VM, very easy to be very direct with what that costs for that individual user. But then we've got that underlying cost, these shared costs. So how do we divvy them up? And we've got a few different ways of doing that, and that gives your business the flexibility to choose which way is most appropriate for your finance people and how you want to interact with your business. So let's explain the next 3 bits and then ask that question again, see if it makes sense.
Yeah, so I quickly will go back. So on this screen we had the report type, which pro rata and usage. So I'm going to explain that on this slide. So listed, what we do in the listed report is pretty much exactly what we explained on the last slide. Is we take all the costs that we can assign to the user and go, this user has used this many minutes and has that cost. But then all the shared costs we just list as detailed as we can. So we say there has been a management VM and it's cost you that much, or there has been that network that you tagged and was part of the cost and that costs you that much. So we list all the user costs and we list all the shared costs. That's why it's called listed. But then what we can do, obviously. Sorry.
Just saying. Sorry, I was just going to say for Dom's benefit, and sorry for putting in someone on that listed one. It might be that you say your IT department are actually going to absorb their shared costs, right, and they're not going to charge them back, right. And we have actually seen organisations that I've got a budget inside of IT there where that should be sat, right. And so the listed one just literally just totals up all the costs, and then you can choose to do what you want with them, right. And it might be that you just absorb them, right.
Yep. Exactly. So you have that option, but obviously if we do that per user report, then we might want to choose to actually allocate all the costs to the users, right? So nothing is left there and everything is split by the user. So we have two options to do that. So option one is by user account pro rata. So that means any user that has logged on in a given month to the system is classified as a user, so a monthly active user. And if the user has logged on, they get the same share, the same proportion of costs. So that's just total shared cost divided by the users, and they get all the equal share of costs assigned to them.
So just a comment on that, and again thinking about scenarios I've seen inside of different organizations and businesses. That pro rata one, as someone just saying, is on the monthly active users. Now, some businesses still want to do it even if the user doesn't log on, right? And but they've been allocated within their business the service. They might just want to divide that, and then you'd use the listed one and just divide by the number of people that you've given access to, right? But this pro rata one is the ones that have actually used it during the month. So we're taking the total cost and divided it by the people that have logged on, right? Again, that gives you that flexibility to do either model, right, within your business.
So if you use the listed, you'd have to divide that by the number of users, basically, then to do the cost apportionment, because the system won't do that for you.
Yeah, but yes, and look, that listed one where I've seen in a lot of organizations, if you put the users into a security group, you could use it. That's the number that we use to divide by. Right. What we're saying with the pro rata one, we've been a bit smarter about that. We're going, if you've logged on during the month, then you've used the service during the month, and here's your pro rata to that. Right? So you got easy to do both with the numbers that we're giving you. Right?
Yeah, so you can log on for 5 minutes and it doesn't matter. You're an active monthly user, therefore you get a cost apportion to you. Can you slice and dice, or is it choose one only? Can you only select one option?
So the report is available, so you can just change that drop down and gives you all the numbers, right? So you don't have to say, oh, I want to do it that way or I want to do it this way. You can just run the report and see how those numbers change and how that looks in your environment.
Okay.
And then the last one's probably the most forward thinking and cloud based one.
Yeah. The last one is by user usage. So think about the scenario where one user would log on for 1 hour in a month and another user would log on 10 hours in a month. So we split the cost, the shared cost, on top of the session based cost and what we can allocate to the user. We split that cost according to the proportion of usage, right? So we say you either get 1 hour worth of cost or 10 hours worth of cost, right? So we can split the cost according to your usage.
And I think that's the best option for us, where we want to actually look at costs that are prorated to other.
Yeah.
Because we're talking about non-agency work users.
Yeah.
So where we offer
just be careful when you're using it, because I agree with you. I think that is the fairest and it's the most appropriate for the actual usage. But it's a lot of businesses, that's going to vary a lot, right, each month. So when you're doing chargebacks or showbacks, if you're doing showbacks, it's probably really good. But if you're doing chargebacks, then you're going to have to deal with it moving around each month, and some businesses struggle with that, right? So the department might want to have a budget and have a fixed cost per month, and they're saying, well, what is that? And so you're gonna have to think about how you do that. But what we've definitely got is really clear visibility of that, so you can have a really good conversation with your business, right? And you can see exactly what it was used.
And I think what we're planning, and this is a very loose term, planning, is to have like a fixed monthly cost for a cohort of users to offer this service to them, which would be lower than what we expect, so that we could then do a final true up at the end of the financial year, and this reporting method would give us that figure to say, well, okay, using that across the whole reporting period for the whole year, it costs $10,000. We only charged you $8,000, so we've got a true up figure there. We obviously don't want to have to provide a refund, so we want it to always be less, so that the customer then pays the top up as part of a true up at the end of the year.
Well, what this will do for you is, and someone's going to go into a bit more detail on the next slide, is we can see that user right down to the minutes that they were using, so we can allocate costs like that, and you can choose that model with these 3 different options, right? Just to be clear as well, the pro rata and the usage proportion, they take the VM costs and then add that proportion on top, so it's the total, right? So it's they, and where it's listed, you've got the separate VM listed to the shared costs. That makes sense?
Okay, so
yeah.
the by user usage would be the total cost for that user over the reporting period. So we don't. It's not 2 figures; it's 1 figure.
Well, yeah, you can obviously see the split there, but yes, it would be 1 figure for each user.
Mm-hmm.
So basically, if you think about that, if you looked at an export of those figures in the listed report, you would get 1 user that has logged on each. You get a row for each user that has logged on, because they obviously had sessions as well. So there's the session cost, and then you had all the shared cost listed on that export. Whereas the other 2, you basically get just 1 line per user. With that cost, or basically 2 lines per user, sorry, with the session cost and the shared cost allocation.
Yep. Okay.
Cool.
But yeah, I think it's very relevant, and some decisions need to be made how you do that in your business. And I think one obviously could be good or could be bad depending on how you do things. That per user cost varies either by a fair bit or not, right? But that's obviously depending on the usage pattern. So we'll really have to think about, do we use it for showback? Do we use it for chargeback? What's the impact of a user cost going up and down throughout the month, right? All those things.
What I like
to think about before we make a choice here.
Yeah. What I like most, if I bring back to my infrastructure management days, was having to have the conversation with the business and trying to explain why it cost X, right? And it was really, really hard on-prem to try and break down costs with lots of things showed. What we've got with this tool is we can have a really clear conversation, and we can show them reports down to individual users going, job logs, logged on this many hours. I can show you when he logged on each day and how long he worked for and where those costs actually are. And you can have a really powerful, and he puts the control back into the IT team. You can really you can control the conversation, right, and be really transparent with the business. Where we was quite that traditionally that's been really, really difficult. Right?
Yeah, it's very factual, right? Cool. So just to round that out, this is a screen of a user detail report. So you can see a lot of the same tiles on here as the previous report, the summary report, but obviously at the top right there, we choose a particular user. We can then see the total costs, allocated, unallocated, storage network access, and the proportion of the AVD platform cost. And then some more detail on session hours, VM types, resources, days logged on, and average session time. So, and the session log. So you will see all that detail of a particular user and the usage pattern, how many hours, and what the cost is for that.
One other thing I suppose I was mentioning is that because we've got that report type drop down, if you want to go back and change your mind on how you're doing the billing, or have a different conversation with it, you can go back to those reports from previous months and show it in different formats, right? You've always got the data at your fingertips.
Yeah, exactly. Cool. So just some of the features and benefits we listed there. Obviously, the main aim is to give you that consumption-based user cost report, which we showed you can do. You can also gain insights into your AVD environment usage by time, user, and cost. So usually I think the time and the user, you might be able to get that, but I think pairing that with the cost is obviously very powerful, because you get a good base understanding of your cost and of your usage of the environment. And we can export all that data you saw, so the underlying data set, to create the summary report or the user-based report. You can export that into a CSV format for further analysis as well.
Yeah, and you might want to do things like add a cost center for the user, or a business unit, or that they sit in, and or a group of users like you were mentioning before, Dom, right? So you can, once you've got that CSV, they got that at your fingertips to be able to add some static data from your business and report on that as well.
Yeah.
Stealing my thunder, obviously. Yeah, I mean, I guess as long as you have,
as always, Sylvan, as always,
as long as you have other data sources that specifically work well with the user, right? So if you had a user cost center data source, or user location, or whatever it might be, then obviously splitting those numbers in onto cost centers or locations or whatever it might be, business units, anything, right? Then that becomes very, very, very easy, right? And I think that's usually data that's available somewhere within the business. So all we need is that mapping from the user to any other metric, and then we can obviously report on that.
What about OUs or AD groups?
Yeah, I mean, we're using the user's UPN, right? So we've got the user's name wherever that sits, and you can marry that up within your organization. You can absolutely do that. Yeah.
Okay.
Exactly. And so to make that advanced reporting a bit easier, we also working on a Power BI connector. So obviously, so all the good data you saw and the template with those summary reports or the per user report will be available in Power BI. So you can just open up Power BI or obviously publish that report and get all that data in there. But I think the beautiful thing there and the real benefit is that you can easily then add those additional data sources. So wherever you have data that is then user related, you can obviously bring that into Power BI, and then on top of what we built, you can tailor that or build in stuff that is important to your business. So I think that makes it really, takes it to the next level and makes it very powerful for any reporting you might want to do.
I don't know if you guys have used Power BI much at the moment, but we use it a lot internally at cubesys because it's very dynamic, right? So with all that data, you can then analyze and see in different ways, look at different months, different individual users, all sorts of different things will come out of that. And I think it will be powerful not just for finance people, but also for IT people when we start to see those session times and what times a day that it's used. And our intention is that we'll provide some sample templates, right? So the connector will come with the product, and you can then obviously consume all that data that Sylvan's been talking about. But we'll also give you some templates in Power BI, so some different ways that you might want to visualize those. But you'll be able free to do whatever you want with them after that.
Yeah, exactly. And I guess in our SaaS application, our web front end, we will have those that summary report there that you can use and consume, and you can export the data from there, right? But obviously, I guess the data set itself is very useful and powerful, but we don't want to build every client's requirements into that web interface. Hence, it's way easier to obviously export that data through the Power BI connector, and then you're free to go. You can basically do whatever you want with that. And as Paul said, we do provide the templates that you have a really good starting point, understanding the data set, and then you adding on from there will be fairly easy.
And then, for example, Tom, you were talking about connecting to AD. You could absolutely do that through Power BI, right? It's got connectors into the back end of Microsoft World as well, so you could have the two connectors in the one Power BI report and combine the data. Right?
Yep, sounds good.
Yeah, so we really want to make that as simple as possible to give you a good data set, and obviously, I guess the hard work with all the calculation and how we break down things is already done, so that is already on the user. So then summarizing that and, as I said, breaking that down on other metrics from there on is fairly straightforward.
Yep.
But with that, we also working on some other reports that we want to put in there. So more user drill down, more infrastructure based reports, and more on that time analysis as well. So we can really drill down into log-on times on a certain day or on average on days and things like that. So just gives us a better understanding of how the environment is used, and obviously gives different people different angles to look at that data and that AVD environment.
And I foresee there's like a feedback loop. So if the IT guys look at things like that, time analysis, they'll be able to fine tune the automation even better, right? So they'll understand what type of users where, all that type of stuff in much more detail, right? Than is probably native in the platform. Right?
Exactly, and I think it's always good to have a baseline and then a comparison. So you could obviously compare June to December or whatever, and then you'd see how it's changed over time and all that kind of good stuff, right? So having that data and being able to go back and compare things is also very powerful.
Yep.
Cool. That brings us to questions. Any other questions?
Needs to be some. Sorry, Dom. Do you want to?
Sorry, is Cloud Clarity a subscription product, or so how would DCS engage cubesys to obtain the product offering?
Yeah, so I haven't said that before. Good question. So that's fully marketplace integrated. So we sell that through the Microsoft Marketplace, and it's directly charged to your Azure bill, and it's fully SaaS. So it can be used as a full SaaS offering. Yeah, so very easy to set up and very easy to use. And it is charged to your Azure subscription as well. So we can obviously, if you're interested, we can take that conversation offline and show you how to do that.
Yep.
But yes, very easy to consume.
And it's a subscription, annual subscription.
Correct. Oh, yep. It's subscription, but also we charge on a per user basis as well for the AVD feature. Yes.
Okay. Yeah, maybe if we can have some sort of information pack sent on the service offering and how we consume it, that would be good.
Yeah, no, not a problem. Cool. I think that's, if there are no other questions, that's it for today. Thanks a lot for your time. Yeah, I hope we were able to show you how to understand and report on your AVD costs. And yeah, hopefully, if you have any other questions, obviously reach out. And if you're interested in using the product, we can set up a follow-on session for that.
Certainly. And just on the cubesys discussion series, we are going to continue the series. So it's been well used and lots of great feedback. So what we're going to do now going forward is move things onto a monthly basis rather than fortnightly, and then we're going to specialize in some different areas. So I think the next one that we have is on engineering workloads, so those heavy GPU type applications, so how best to configure and use those, and that'll be our next session. But we have 3 or 4 others planned, and we'll probably continue after that as well. All right, so we'll have a session on Windows 365, one that specializes on security, and we'll look at Essential 8 and what we've been doing for some clients in that space. So lots to come on the discussion series. So
is there one next week? Because this one was deferred from last week.
It was one push up. We've decided to move them out to monthly to be about approximately 1 month from now, Dom, and we'll send out notifications. Yeah.
Okay.
Because we would have been wrapping up about now. The session
that's
right.
It's
going to be 8 in turn, but we've because we have good feedback and more interest, we're going to extend that and just push that out to a monthly cadence. Though. Right.
Excellent.
No worries. No, we'll call it a wrap. So thanks very much for your time, guys.
Perfect.
Thanks, guys. That was excellent.
Yes.
Thanks for that.
Bye.
Thanks very much.
Bye.
Bye.